All right, all right. Welcome back to another episode of Wild and Well Together. He said, she said. Today, we're going to talk about interdependence, Becca. This dance between interdependence and independence, the push-pull we all feel between wanting to stand on our own 2 feet and wanting to know that we're held and supported by others. The pressure to be endlessly strong, self-reliant, and fine, even when we're not. So we'll also unpack the stories that we inherited about strength, support, and not being a burden, and explore how real wellness happens in community, not in isolation. And at the core of all of this conversation is about remembering that we're built for connection as humans. So let's get into it, wild ones. But before we do that, let's start with some high-low buffalo. Kick us off, Becca.
The buffalo that I have is I was pulled over yesterday taking my kids to school, and my son thought it was epic. He was like, "Mom, ask the police officer his name." Once I found out, Officer Johnson, thank you. And he goes, "Oh, do you think you'll go to jail?" And I said, "No, bud. Listen, I was going 37 in a 25. So speeding, it was a school zone though. So I am
Oh,
so busted and I owe a fine." And so I'm like, "No, I'm not going to jail." However, we're sitting there and this just says partially who my son is. And also we do high-low buffaloes in our house every night. So that way we can combine getting to know each other and having family meals. So Marcus looks at me and we're waiting. I've given my insurance, I've given my ID, all that stuff. So Officer Johnson is back in his car. We're waiting. And
yeah.
Marcus goes, "Mom, do you think that getting pulled over is going to be your buffalo or your low of the night?" And he goes, "I can't wait to tell Dad."
Of
And
course.
so Nick picks him up from school yesterday, and true confession, I got pulled over by a police officer for speeding.
You know that's
So
a core memory for him.
it
Both
is,
the
and it's a core
experience
memory
and
for
how
me.
you handled the situation is a core memory.
Can I also tell you, I was way calmer and it turned it into fun. My ego was removed because it was not, hey, let me have all my stuff together. Let me be angry. Let me be whatever. Like I'm better than being pulled over for speeding. I was speeding. And so it turned into a fun situation where am I pumped to pay this fine? No, I am not. Is it nominal in the long run? Yes. However, my son is pumped. And then the other one would be Lulu walks into her school then, proud as can be. And she goes, "We got to meet a police officer this morning. Mom got pulled over." So community knows, thanks to my kids, all wrapped in one. My high, my low, and my buffalo now are, I got pulled over by a police officer. Officer Johnson, thank you for doing your work. And my kids are pumped because they got to know a police officer.
Love
What
it.
about you? Where are you at?
Okay, so my high was my daughter's 4th birthday, and it's kind of an unusual experience this year. Normally, kids' birthdays are fun, and generally, like you're fun. It's happy for a little while, but a lot of it's just a lot of work to make sure they have a great day. But this year just felt different. We felt a lot of gratitude this year for her and like what she brings in our lives. And Mary and I were reflecting, like she was born at one of the hardest times of our marriage based on the situation that we were in. We were remodeling a house, Miriam's in grad school, like it was chaos at the time. And we have like amnesia, like we barely remember her as a baby. And she's like the happiest, funniest, and just brings so much joy. So it was a high for us. It was a child birthday that just felt different this year.
Love that.
Low, and this is a real low. This is like a month low, and we're going to bring it back up here in a second, but I have a really good friend who is going through a divorce, and it feels really sudden and shocking for me. And we've been processing what this means for him. Like if it feels like this for us, like what does that feel like for him?
Yeah.
And, doing what I can and what we can to be a supportive friend. And it's kind of a growing up moment. Like you go through these phases like, oh, I've got friends that are married. I've got friends that are having kids. And when the first divorce hits, it's like, whoa, is that where I am in my life? So not to make this about me, but I just feel for my friend and want the best for him. Taking it back up, the buffalo is I found some time to get in the garage to work on a woodworking project. I'm building an entryway table, use some power tools. I got to use my hand tools to cut a mortise and tenon. I'm sure you're very familiar with this.
Yes. Have that be the new word of the week because I'm so familiar. Let's get into it.
Yeah. Okay, mortise and tenon. Just think of like an electric outlet. Okay, you need one side to go into the other.
The male and the female parts.
Male to female, made with wood, and you have to use chisels and saws, and it is like extremely satisfying. It's very rewarding, and the time to go out and do it doesn't come around that often. So felt great to make some progress, and that's my.
What is that term again?
Mortise and tenon.
Mortise and tenon. And is
if
mortise
you
the
wanna talk
male or the
join-
female? Or I'm getting too into the depths.
Yeah, the tenon is the male and the mortise is the female. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah,
A little sex ed for us on a
that's right.
Wednesday.
Who
Here we
knew the wood
go.
shop could be so damn sexy?
There you go. And nonetheless, you got some time to get in there.
Yep,
Good.
yep, per our prior conversations, huh?
Yeah. Hey, it's actually playing out in our own lives too, right?
That's right,
That's our hope of
practicing what we
doing this.
preach.
And was it independent time or did you have some other little helpers, some little elves?
Mostly independent, and
Nice.
then one bit of it at 5 in the morning, put the baby in the high chair with some things in hand, some toys, some tools that are not sharp, and just have him, bang away on things. So, a little bit of both.
Love that. Okay.
Well, let's get into it.
Yeah. Tell me on the scale of codependent, interdependent, and independent, if we put it on a scale, Jen and I did this too. Where do you fall on that spectrum of codependent? Or the healthier term would be collaborative, right? Like that's the independent heading to codependency would be collaborative. And then independent would go farther into isolation, right? So we could
Yeah.
do, it's all a spectrum. Let's call it that. Where do you find yourself, if you're honest, heading more towards codependency or independent?
Well, I think, uh, interdependent is the headline. Our last conversation was being versus becoming. I have become interdependent. I was thinking about the areas of my life that I was really independent
Yeah.
on, and had to change that based on, finding a partner, getting married, having a family that looks very different, and your independence can look different. And Mira and I both have to be very independent when we got married, and that actually led to like more conflict than you'd expect. And then being honest with myself, there's also areas that I've identified where I was codependent,
Mm.
and happy to say that I've moved towards interdependence. I could probably do some more thinking and find areas that I'm codependent if I'm being real. But I mean, I cannot braid hair. So my daughter's getting out to school. If they want their hair braided that day,
It's mom.
I'm dependent there. So that's my headline answer is interdependent, but I can go into specifics. How about you though?
Cool. It's fun that you brought in the past of being versus becoming. I grew up in a household, and my husband and I are different. He grew up in a household where they'd go get 2, 3, 5 hours during the afternoon alone in their rooms, doing their own thing, like just very independent.
Mhm.
We grew up where we would be on top of each other, and maybe one of us would be reading while the other one's doing their homework, while the other one's playing a game or whatever. But like we were
Yeah.
always together as a unit. And so I was like, what? This isn't codependency. This is family. And so from a young age, I'm still that type of person. Like, what's
Yeah.
personal space? Let's figure it out together, right? Like, which is not how personal space works. So I've moved much more to the interdependent as well, and even independent of I enjoy things now that Nick doesn't, and that's okay. So I love alone yoga. I love alone walking. Love doing alone. So now there's these exercises or different things that fulfill me on my own, and nerding out and learning about the depth of neuroscience or how we relate human to human, some of those different nerdy things. I love the research on my own. And so I've actually moved much more to the interdependent and then up even more into independent. But then I'm a mom of two littles. And so again, I get all my feed of codependency or side by side proximity, all those things often. So I'd like to say I'm interdependent because I do think that that's the healthiest way to live. However, Nick and I work in a really healthy relationship similarly where he pulls weight in some things and I pull weight in other things. Let me also say this. Normally, I'd say 9 times out of 10, he takes out the trash and the recycling. For those of you that listened this last time, our recycling, c'est la vie, is all
Oh,
gone. We no longer have a tree sprouting in our house.
great feeling. You know
Yeah.
how I feel about bulk trash pickup. Recycling being picked up is just like a little hit of that.
Yeah. And I handled it. So I'm not all codependent. I
Nice.
handled that.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think, I'm remiss here. We should probably take a step back and better define interdependence with
Oh,
with
nice.
codependency, or interdependence versus independence. So, interdependence is a healthy, balanced relationship where partners mutually rely on each other while maintaining their individuality, whereas codependency is an unhealthy, one-sided relationship with excessive emotional reliance or a loss of self. I'm curious, like how can you then define interdependence versus independence?
So independence, and I pulled this up because I love that you went into the definition, is the ability to meet your own needs, make your own decisions, and function without relying heavily on others. It's a combination of self-trust, personal responsibility, autonomy, and confidence in your abilities to handle life's tasks. So it is this idea of, no, I can do it on my own. I got this. And I thought is healthy. However, biologically, we were not designed to do life alone. And so the shadow side of independence is that I don't ask for help when it's needed. I choose not to be fulfilled by a relationship, a partnership. There was interdependence, I think, still honors. Sometimes I'm going to go do my individual activities or what fulfills me as who I am. I still have that self trust that I'm capable of it. And yet I rely on those when needed or when wanted. When we talk about like psychology and stuff, it would be interdependence, recognizing I'm my own individual within a greater society or ecosystem, then independence because I can handle my own. And then codependence is where I start to lose my identity because I am only fulfilled or find who I am in
Yeah.
someone else or alongside someone else. So that'd be my understanding of it. How does it play out in life? I think is in a dance and in like an intermixed web, truthfully, because your kids, let's talk about that. Your kids, my kids, fully codependent on us. And that's actually not a bad thing. They're starting to learn autonomy depending on their age. They're digging into the things that they love more. They're taking a stake in the game, if you will, sometimes for better, for worse, but trying to make their way for themselves in the world. And yet at the end of the day, my kids still are dependent on me and my spouse and other people
Yeah.
around. So not a bad thing necessarily. They're able to balance back and forth of like, oh, this is what I love to do independently. However, I recognize that I have to exist within the ecosystem. That's even a sexual drive. That's primal. If I want to live, if I want my species to live, I need to recognize I need a partner. Even for that, right? That's hindbrain. That's back to our existence from what does it look like to procreate. So that's like from a very basic level. So therefore, anything else will stack on top of that. And so it might be
Yeah.
activities that you enjoy doing alone. It might be thoughts that you have on your own, all healthy. But then, yes, you're able to move into this interdependence of like, okay, what's the dance now that I have with people in my life? I think
Yeah.
that happens even within your business, right? Like if you think about the workplace in general, how many of your tasks do you do alone? And how many of them do you have to go up to a manager? Do you have to go, to a teammate? Do you have to go to a colleague? Like, do you even have to
Yeah.
reach out to the IT person to say, hey, can you help me fix this thing? Those are the dance between interdependence and independence.
Absolutely. I think, I work for a big, like, well-established company, and I think like most companies of that size or has been around, that it is built and designed for interdependence, so that
Hmm.
decisions are made with a plurality of thought, a plurality of expertise, and I think that this is by design and proven out because you can go fast alone or far together. And I thrive in that type of environment. I'd like to think that I would work in the other, independently as well, but I really do enjoy collaborating, and I really enjoy um, having other hands on work that creates outcomes that are bigger than I would have expected if it were just myself. So I certainly in the workplace, I think interdependence is like it's built into the system, as
Hmm.
things grow, as the responsibilities grow, as the opportunities grow, you need more people on it. And I think the analog in my life is at home or outside of work is the same is true. I mean, I did a from to chart of of independence, the ways I was independent and the ways I am now interdependent, from most like superficial to increasingly cutting at the core. So, like, as an example,
Nice.
my activities when I was single or just dating my wife, it was my time, my schedule, my agenda, my hobbies, my whatever I want to do. If I want to wake up at 7 and go surfing, I do that. If I want to go, go to the bar, could do that, right? It's all out in front of me. And like, even while we were dating, we were doing distance. So our independence was very much so part of our identity. Now I'm coordinating or participating in the coordination of the need of 4 others with my wife to ensure all 5 of us have our needs met and many of our wants as well.
Hmm.
Household responsibilities. I think about like, what did I do when I lived in an apartment by myself? I did the tasks that I valued. We've talked about this. I'm a clean person, not an organized person. So the 409 is getting busted out and things are going to be clean, but there's going to be piles of like papers and clothes around too.
Yeah.
So the ones I didn't like, I did less often. Now there's like specialization between my wife and I to do the ones that we both value, both of us value are done. And doesn't mean that we only like we can do both tasks, but it's now her priority becomes my priority becomes her priority. So and in career we talked about this, but it used to be I'm looking at career versus workplace. So in the career sense, Do I need to move? Absolutely. Tell me where you need me to go. Do I need to work 60 hours a week? Sure. I can find 60 hours a week to do this project or this thing that's going to accelerate your career. No problem. When's it due? I need to, now we go through seasons of prioritizing my wife's career, Miriam's career, because she's very successful, and mine as well. And we balance that. And I was reminded in preparation of this that I had a major mess up here. I am traveling like 3 or 4 weeks this spring for work, and like sent the invite, but failed to mention this in conversation with Miriam. So that's on me. My bad. And then just the final point here is on parenting. The independence would be certainly all like the routine stuff. And that, again, that's superficial, but the hard decisions and the how to bring values to life through parenting decisions is absolutely an interdependent conversation. I trust Miriam's values. She trusts mine. We trust that we're going to make the right decision for our kids. There's always jump balls, and the way that we would approach this looks different. And we are interdependent on each other for this part of our life. So those are the ones that I mapped out. I'm curious if there's anything that jumps out at you where you moved from like really independent to more interdependence.
From independent to interdependent, not the codependency or that side. We're staying with this side first.
Yeah.
Okay.
Start there. We'll get to codependency.
Yeah. Independent. I like what I like. And so I think that that's something, right? That's the ego, but in a healthy way, trusting who I am in the gut check. Like, I've been able to live a really successful life over the last 35 years as a whole, like net positive. It's there of I could have relationships that were healthy for the most part. I've been able to have jobs. And so I'm like, oh, this is working for me. And so then it's forging in a marriage or a partnership. It's like, oh, wait, we have to talk how much about this? Like, or we have to spend how much time of our brain power in this? Like, that was a learning curve for me where I'm like, why don't we just do what I want? Right. And like, that's not that healthy, but like, why don't we do that? And then talk about parenting that further expedited that of like, no, this is how I want to do it. And I'm like, that's not honoring, nor is that fun. Like, I trust Nick. I love that you brought in trust because there's a term that a lot of moms fall into. And for men to know it's really helpful or for dads to know it is gatekeeping as parents. And it's this primal existent within us women. And we don't even know how to say it until it's brought up. But it's this idea of, I trust me first. I've raised this baby for 9 months in my belly. What I say is the best thing. And so Nick might be like, I think he's crying because he's hungry. And I'm like, no, he's not crying because he's hungry. And then I'm like, whoa, why would
Yeah.
I have such a visceral reaction? Like, I don't know if he's right. He could be hungry. That's as valid as like, he could have a poopy diaper, right? When he was a child. That's called gatekeeping. Thank goodness for really awesome men who Nick went through a cohort, just like learn how to dad. And yes, to support me, but also how can he dad well too? And so that gatekeeping, it gave us a word to say when I felt like my emotions were higher, or my control or whatever, talk about hormone imbalances, for delivery. And so for me to learn like, oh, this feels harsh to Nick. I need to come into that interdependence and saying like, hey, he's equally your son as he's mine, right? Like, it's not like it's 50-50, it's 100 and 100. And how do we make 100 and 100 work, especially for both healthy? Like, sometimes I might feel like I'm 10% or 40% or 90% of energy, and same with Nick. Otherwise, a lot of times we operate at a high level. And so coming back into that independence to interdependence was saying both in marriage and parenting of how do we talk about this? How do we spend the energy to collaborate, to have fun? Because what Nick brings to the table is awesome. So that's on the relational side. And then in work, I love that quote of we're better together. I know a lot, but if I relate to something digitally, I can learn even more. Or even better, let me call up John and say like, hey, let's do a podcast together. 20-year-old me would have said, I'll just do it on my own. I'll do it for women or I'll figure it out. And then 35-year-old me's like, no, actually, I want to have conversations that are deep, not just 20-second clips, but the depth of, hey, what do you think about this? Let's spend an hour figuring this out, talking about it, inviting others into that space. So that's the long of the long. But I'm moving more towards interdependence.
Yeah.
What do you have for the codependent side? I'm very curious because I think that is like the stepsister.
Let's
If we call it what
show
it
the
is.
ugly parts, huh?
Yeah, come on. That's why we said yes to this.
So I think my codependency was on my wife, and I was having trouble making sense of emotions as my life is changing very quickly. Independence to married to now family, figuring out how to be a parent for the first time, all the other things going on in my life. And I think it led to conflict. It led to short-temperedness, to a lot of frustration, burnout, generally just not happy, just not in a good place. And what would happen is my codependency specifically was along comes this emotion and I'm not able to name it. So along comes a conflict with Miriam. And over the course of 30 minutes to an hour, we're actually identifying what's going on here and having a discussion about why I'm feeling this way about the underlying issue. So as a husband, my codependency was on my wife to figure out basically what I'm feeling. I I don't have her on retainer. She's not an in-house psychologist. That's not her job. Our job, it's to support me, sure, but this is self-work that needs to be done. And we can talk about
Mhm.
self-work, but through that work is I learned to better identify emotions and what's driving the emotion, how it relates back to a self narrative, and then communicating that. So there may be something that there may still be conflict, but being able to put in place the emotion of why I'm feeling this way in response to whatever she did or didn't do or whatever it may be, or other people in my life, and having a much more productive, level-headed conversation about it is what I think interdependence looks like. And the key part was like I needed to do the self-work to get there, to move from codependency to interdependence.
Cool. I love that.
Again, we've talked about this in past episodes. This is not mission accomplished, always progressing and always learning, but this is an area that I like feel confident that I've progressed, from 4 years ago.
For
How about
sure,
you?
and then you're not dumping on her, but rather inviting her into the space of your healing process,
Yeah,
right? And
well
that's
said.
that's that's huge because I've shared this. I'm a recovering people pleaser. I no longer find worth in what other people say about me. I value and I have relationship with that, but I don't make my decisions based on what other people think about me
Mm,
or the comments made, which is huge. And on my healing journey, who can I invite into that space? But I'm not required to respond to what they've done or said or what they think, nor does my value come from what they say, believe, or think. And that's been huge to me of like, I have the power to invite someone in. And that's that self trust of independency
mhm.
and the interdependency then is I am going to invite you in where I'm like, hey, John, what are your thoughts on this? So then you share your thoughts because I trust you. But then ultimately, I may take them and say, like, oh, yeah, that's what I want to do with it. Or I may say, like, oh, that was really valid. However, I left out X, Y, and Z. Therefore, I'm going to go this route instead. And that's healthy. Those are healthy dialogues to have with myself. And so my codependency has gone from saying, okay, what other people think, say, or do about me will dictate how I operate and what I
Yeah,
do, or even where my core value comes from. So I've moved immensely from that. The other piece that I think is interesting from a professional side is stepping into the ring and owning it and being like, no, this is what I think. And saying that and not having to have a qualifier. I'm
yeah,
huge on having qualifiers or in the past. That's my becoming of where I am and I'm continuing to go. I don't need to have a qualifier to say what I say. Sometimes then it's an awkward reaction. Sometimes there's no reaction. And I'm like, oh, what are they thinking then? And I'm like, get out of your head, Becca. Like that's so
yep.
self-focused of like they asked for your opinion at work or for you to deliver this piece. And I did deliver it and done. Like let it go.
Don't
That's it.
mitigate it.
And so not ruminating on like, was it right? Was it wrong? Which is also a codependency of my existence with others.
Absolutely.
So
That tracks with, in a professional sense, a lot as I work with a range of experience. People have been in the career for many years, 20, 30 years, people that are 2 to 3 years in. And I think there's a maturity that comes from that it's learned. It's not, for many people, it's learned. Other people, bless them, they come with this gift of they're ready to own it on day one as a 22-year-old when they start their career. But that's a real one.
and not becoming harsh or bitter towards it because I think that that's a piece of it too is how do I trust myself and then also what's my part and my role within this ecosystem that I'm a part of. And that's a gentle disposition that we can hold on to because what I think happens often is if we're in an interdependent relationship, existence, and something goes sideways, which sometimes it does, that's just part of humaning, like being a human is then we often go towards one of the other parts of the spectrum and whatever our default is. So then it's like, oh, well, I'm just going to isolate and be so independent because I can't trust people. Or, oh gosh, I'm going to go to the codependency and my values only with those that I trust
Hmm.
and only what they say is what I actually am about. And we're seeing that politically. We see that in a lot of different sectors is like that bouncing back and forth and coming back to this place of I can be confident in who I am, what I think, and also have a gentleness towards the ecosystem that I'm within. So I think that
Yeah.
happens in the workplace in the healthiest places. I think it happens in like at a national local, and then within the family, like nuclear household too, even. And so that's my 2 cents on the power of living in the interdependent world. What were you going to say, or what were you going to jump into?
One of the specific ways, one of the tactics to work towards interdependence, and you
Yeah.
brought this up. We talked about retreat
Mhm.
on our last in our last discussion, and I think that retreat is a one like pretty powerful way to start towards interdependence. And I think of like my experiences with retreats, and it's funny because at 35 I didn't, it was not on my bingo card to say, to say that I've done a bunch of retreats, but turns out that I kind of have, and it looks different. So as an example, I'm breaking this down into alone, and then with others, and then informal. Alone, informally, Lord knows I spent many days on a river by myself, on a mountain, less so like mountain biking sometimes, mostly on a river fishing. And it's informal in the sense that I'm there to have a day out. It's not structured, but my mind certainly goes to a point of reflection. I'm relaxed. The whatever daily obligations are left aside, and some good things come from that time. Whereas alone and structured, I went on a retreat, was called the Hoffman process, and it's learned a bit through um, friends and family, and it's pretty intense process. 5-day retreat, tense self work, and it's not. There are other people in the cohort, but none of whom I knew. So I basically consider it's a lot of it is self work. It's not about building relationships. It's even though you're on this journey together with other people. This sounds very woo. I understand that it's not. There's no mind altering substances involved. There's no cult initiations. Um, and but I will say it's intense self work to understand who I am, the reactions to stimuli of like what's out in the world, methods of addressing those patterns. It's really about understanding patterns, how to not fall into that same pattern. Some patterns really serve us, others don't. But it really leads for me led to just more living life more authentically. It's not a 100% leap. It's what I was reflecting on this of like what has changed since then. And I was asking Miriam about this as well. And I think really that my headline here is accountability with self-empowerment, is taking ownership of things, and not in a shameful way, like it's an empowered way. So again, I'm not in my final form, but I have found the Hoffman process for me specifically was amazing. I know that there are other ways to for structured retreats, and it allows me then to show up in a relationship interdependently, to show up at work and be interdependent in a healthy way, and be, I hope, a joy to work with and to enjoy working with others. And then back to with others informally, adventures with the guys for sure, being in the outdoors, dealing with adversity or at a minimum inconvenience is like with others, builds it interdependence. Roles start to get assigned. Individual strengths are put to use. Individual weaknesses are accounted for by the group. There's a reason you don't backcountry ski alone. And the reason you don't is that like there's also, you don't do that with people that haven't trained before, because your life can actually depend on it or rely on the other person. So, like as an example, two friends and I tried to summit Mount Shasta in California, 14. We failed. There's many stories from this trip, but we failed. We got to like 12,000 feet, 2,000 feet short, and then formal retreats that exist, whether it's with church or camps or whatever it may be. But I think the magic there is time away with groups to reflect on what's going on in your life and put all the other stuff aside. So I have found that in my rambling here, that through all these experiences, I believe they're better as an individual and my independence, but it allows me to show up more as an interdependent person better, for lack of a better term. More good.
Yeah, more gooder. I love that. Do you think that it's because it's the relationship with self and others that gets discovered? Is it the fact that you're not so distracted by other things? What are you able to name 1 or 2 or 3 things? The fact you're in nature? What are some of those pieces that did change it for you?
Yeah, I think the informal ones, like in nature, it's about fun and there's a nice reset there without a doubt. But you get the diet version, light version of some of the things that you learn about yourself. But those memories are important. Those are the things that we daydream about while we're doing hard stuff or boring stuff. Those memories sit with me. And then for the more formal or intentional retreats, yeah, I think for me, identified what my self narrative is. And then sounds like this is all negative, but like what's your shame story? What are the things that I feel shame about? For me, for a long time, it's like, am I smart enough? And
Yeah.
it's built off of childhood stuff, unintentional stuff, and a chance encounter with a teacher, whatever it may be. Like you can't plan a child's life to not have some shame story. It's going to happen. So in this experience, acknowledging that this is the shame story and what feeds into that, or what flows from that, are these negative reactions to things, because this is a part that I don't like. And then having the presence of mind to say, oh, this is hits at this thing that I don't like. I can put this in its place and address this other thing at face value. So I mean, I can't condense 5 days into a 30-minute
No.
conversation, but I think for me, that's my biggest takeaway. And it changed in real ways. What you feel is like this big leap when you leave there, and then it all kind of like peters down, and then the dust settles. And when the dust settles, you're still better off than you were before. Maybe you weren't doing everything right. That's okay. But that is for me, understanding what my shame story largely was at the time. And I guess still is, but it does not as present. And then the way it manifests is in relationships primarily, or individual thoughts, dreams, wishes, all those things that flow from that.
No doubt. Shame is the monster that we can let grow. There's this indigenous analogy of we have two wolves, and either we feed the fear one or we feed the healing one. And the choice is like, which one do we do? And so for you, you've chosen, okay, here's my shame based story for so long. And it was fed by so many different external things and internal things. And now through Hoffman and then other work that you've done since, you're like, actually, I recognize that I have fear or I have shame held within this. I'm going to acknowledge it so that way I don't avoid it. But also, I'm going to start healing this. I'm going to feed the healing and I'm going to do the work that I need to. So then I can actually let this monster or this wolf be the healthier one, be the one that controls more of my life or exists more within me than the anger and the fear and the shame base, because shame will shackle us till the day we die. And so I love that, because what happens often in men and women, but what we see is primarily we were designed not to be lone wolves, and like elephants, right? Bull elephants live alone. So I don't think that we're designed as that. I know we as humans are social beings. However, men tend more toward the independent side than women do by
Yeah.
design. What happens often is if we don't heal, when we don't heal those wounds that start from a young age, then we become the angry men that we see in the world. Then we become the self-focused mean guys, to put it PG, but like
Yeah.
just jerks in the world, right? Then we become these men who are little boys by their actions, but just in big bodies, right? However, you said, I'm actually going to heal the shame that I have from intellectual conversations of the past or some of these other things that really shackled me to not living the life that I want to. And we haven't brought this up yet. And I will go through shame, because shame is a conversation that we need to have relationship with and give it its right place so we don't avoid it, but also not magnify it and be shackled and live a life that's chained to whatever those circumstances are and the language around it. So I appreciate you bringing that in, because again, that sends us very quickly into codependence, or shame does, or it sends us into isolation, and not even independent, but isolation very fast.
Yeah, look, I think the headline for me is a lot of behaviors stem from self-esteem, and the self-esteem flows from what shame stories people tell themselves. And so it manifests in any number of ways. And I think to your point, what we talked about at the top of the episode is how men, I don't get around a group of guys and we talk about our shame story. This will be shocking to you. This is not where we like to start our conversation.
Even we as women, like that's with one, two, that's
Yeah.
that, and it has to be with trustworthy people, right?
Yeah.
That's the other piece. Like, if we're just out there sharing our shame based stories or our
Yeah.
shame stories with everyone, like, that's a really dangerous place to be and
Yeah.
not a fun place to be. Oh, like all jokes aside, yeah, like let's not let that be the case. But keep going with
Yeah.
your story.
Well, and I guess it's a conversation that is like, it doesn't need to be at the forefront, but I think the point is, as it relates to interdependence, is that the self work has to be done to really move towards interdependence in a healthy way. Does everyone need to go on a retreat in their 30s? I don't know. I found it to be useful, and I think there's other ways to get there. Or, that specific retreat is what I mean, right? There's other ways to get there, and it found me at the right time in my life. I was not seeking it out. and it came across my path. I tried it, and it was really, really helpful. I've since understood the benefit of smaller retreats, informal, and like reflecting on these things.
We have to engage and say yes, right? Like that is a
Yeah,
piece of our existence, is also responding back and saying, I'm going to say yes when an opportunity comes. And so cheers to you for saying, I'm going to step into this. That's an interdependent choice to say, my life is worth it. My friends, my wife, and my marriage is worth it. Either we choose to do the hard work to live a life that's better, or we
yeah.
choose to do the hard work and not live a life that's better. And
You
so
pay your bills one way or the other. You can do this
a
type of work
100%.
and front load it and make subsequent time a little bit easier, or you can just keep trudging along, you know?
For sure. What I will say, like where I'll end this, is on the spectrum or in the dance of interdependence, codependence, and independence, is it fluctuates. It is alive. We can change who we are. It's not like we are pigeonholed into one. And so for those of you listening that you're like, I'm actually way more codependent on some things, choose something for yourself that says, this is just for me. I'm going to go do this. It might be scary, but I'm going to go do this and move more towards the interdependent side. For those of you that are independent, may we also though text someone and say, thank you so much for being a friend. Thank you for showing up for me in this hard stuff. Or if that feels too vulnerable, just saying like, hey, can we go play ball? Or can we go grab ice cream? Or doing something that brings us back into a relational side with someone else. 60 seconds to center is to go outside, get some fresh air, breathe in deeply, I am enough. And then to text someone and say, thanks for being a good friend. Pick one that's been a good friend to you and then come back out of it and repeat that again of I'm enough. And then go on with your day. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be woo woo, right? As we got into, but just something that says I'm independent enough as I am. And also who can I relate to and thank them for showing up in my life. So thank you,
Game on.
listeners. Cheers, John. Another one had.
Yeah.
What do you have for us?
I'm excited to go outside and get in this cold weather and take a fresh breath and text someone. If I text you, you know it's coming. So I'm gonna have to choose someone else today. Okay, but know the sentiment is there. Okay.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate you. Thank you,
All
listeners. We'll
right.
see you next week.
Until next time.